Okay, this is a question for Diane. Comes from Antonio, who is from Venezuela, and he says he has the following question. Uh, I think Diane, spoke to a group of people yesterday from South America. You might want to tell us something about that. But his question is: Venezuelan people are divided in a war between the government supporters and the opposition. It has been going on for 20 years, and the physical economy is destroyed, and with it also the general human condition. What would you say to the Venezuelan people in order for them to think like Nicolás of Cusa? I guess he means a coincidence of opposites, and get over these problems.
Okay, sure. Yes, I did have a really delightful discussion yesterday with Dennis Small with a group that the Ibero-American, and also some people from Spain uh, of the LaRouche movement internationally. And one thing that really struck me, which I commented to my husband about after, is the optimism of this group, because what is going on in many of these countries is worse than what just happened to the United States. We're getting a taste of it now, and everybody's ready to throw in the towel and give up. Many of these countries have had regime change wars and sanctions and economic deprivations and all kinds of things for decades. But there's a real sense of optimism, and people are not giving up, but are determined to organize and do something about it. So I think this is very interesting, and I think should be a real potential partnership for the United States. Now, in the case of Venezuela, and I think this would be anywhere where you have these kind of divisions, which are really difficult because both sides are following leadership that is not in the interest of mankind. So what do you do? And I think it's very important to consider what Venezuela has to contribute to the world as a whole, and to remind the population of the potentials of the nation. I was thinking about, why did Lyndon LaRouche write these incredibly optimistic programs like the Republic of Saudi Arabia in the year 2023, or a 50-year plan for the development of the Indian Ocean Basin. All of these programs, one thing that strikes me just from the face of it is that Venezuela is not terribly far from the equator. I don't know what kind of space program is there, but clearly there's great potential for that in that geographical location. And how would you get the population to such a point as to be able to participate in that? The other is that the developments in Venezuela don't merely have to come from Venezuela. If you think about what China is doing in the world, and I know there is discussion and some motion on a transcontinental rail project in Iberoamerica as a whole, well, what are the transportation corridors or potential development corridors that would feed into that? If you think about what's happening in Iraq right now, our collaborator Hussein Askari has been leading a movement now where the younger people of Iraq are demanding that the government collaborate with China in a sort of oil for credit arrangement, where they are able to get the credit for building the massive infrastructure that's needed for the nation. And once you start talking in these terms of physical economy, what's the division? Is having a decent meal on your table, is this an issue of the opposition or the government? Is this eating? Is that right wing or left wing? Or having health care and electricity, is that a need of only right wing people or left wing people, or the government people or the opposition people? So I think that an important approach would be to actually conceptualize a program for the development of the nation, for development of Venezuela as part of the maritime and other Silk Road projects, And I think that you probably will find that the best people from the so-called opposing camps will discover that they agree that this is something that urgently should be done. And as I've often said in organizing people here who are, people who say, how can you support Donald Trump, or why, all these disagreements, would say, look, if we're going to have a good relationship with Russia and China, if we can avoid nuclear war, then we can discuss all the other things. The first step to hammering out our differences is that we have to be here to discuss it. So issues of food, electricity, peace, not having crazy wars are things that people can come together to solve, and then we can have all of the arguments after that.
Okay, thank you. Jason, anything you want to add?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. All right, very good. So, all right, so I just want to thank everybody. Thank Jason Ross, Diane Sare, and Harley Schlanger for today's symposium on how to move from the inferno to at least purgatory. I think Linda LaRouche really wanted us to get to paradise, which was a different location. And I want to say one thing about our Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, sort of in response to what the Venezuelan questioner had asked, how do you move the people of Venezuela to think on the level of Nicolás de Cusa? We have a committee which was formed by Helga Sepp-LaRouche called the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites. And this committee has proposed that there be an international mobilization with the United States taking the lead for the purpose of making available both vaccines as well as medical treatments more generally to the people of Africa and the people of other parts of the world. There's as great a threat of famine to the world. In fact, over 300 million people at this point are threatened with one or another degree of famine and food deprivation. And David Beasley of the World Food Program has called attention to that, and even differentiating himself, in fact, opposing Mike Pompeo on Pompeo's attempt to bring sanctions against the people of Yemen in that regard. The idea is that committee is bringing together people who have very different political views for the purpose of recognizing that you should not politicize disease. You should not politicize famine. And you should not politicize the need that people have for water. These are things that are fundamental to human existence and therefore fundamentally human rights. But the concept is not a human rights movement. The concept is to do something by creating a new economic platform beginning with health and the urgency of marshaling all of the necessary productive forces of humanity for that purpose. So Jocelyn Elders, former Surgeon General of the United States, has joined Helga Sepp-LaRouche as the initiators of that committee. The committee's had several meetings. It has some projects that it is engaged with. But the idea of the committee is that it's merely a catalyst that attempt to identify a character of action to be taken by governments and by other private organizations throughout the world. And the character of catalyst is that the entirety of the globe's population deserves a solution, not only to this pandemic, but to the conditions of deprivation that make it the case that children all over the world who through no fault of their own are born into conditions of poverty, wherever that may be, including in the United States, must be not only protected, but must be allowed to grow and to develop. It's this idea which is the primary conception of physical economy, which Lyndon LaRouche, as you heard if you were at the beginning of the program, that he motivated in his discussions of potential relative population density and the difference between human beings and animals. When questions of ethnicity or questions of so-called gender or other kinds of questions are posed as primary, then you lessen the humanity of people. And you cannot come by economic or social policies, which are human policies, if you don't take the human identity and the identity of the human race as a whole. This is the conception that we're trying to put forward, and this is the conception by which the LaRouche organization has attempted to differentiate itself from others who claim to be supporters of this or that candidate, this or that policy, this or that program, or this or that rights struggle. These are not actually human ways of solving problems, and that's why they don't work. And so what we're hoping we can do is to deepen this dialogue with all sorts of people, but in specific that there is a set of problems that we have to move to solve, and they have to be solved in the short term. So in the respect to the Committee for the Coincidence of Opposites, you can find out more information about this by going to the Schiller Institute website. And also there will be soon some symposia and other discussions that will appear both there and on this site, and you can get more details at that time.